Big thank you to Nebula for sponsoring this video. There are exactly 2 mayors who have been caught on video smoking crack cocaine. In 1990, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, was arrested in a hotel room during a sting organized by the FBI. And in 2013, the Toronto police force announced they had obtained a video of Mayor Rob Ford engaged in what appeared to be illicit activities. Besides this one critical fact, there are very few similarities between the 2 men. Barry was a progressive civil rights activist from the South, and the first to ever become a mayor of a major American city. Rob Ford was a loud fiscal conservative with a love for coaching football. If we had a third data point, maybe we could draw a trend line of some sort. But for now, all we can say is that it's extremely weird that it's happened twice. Despite their controversies, their personal failings, both men have fervent supporters even years after they passed away. Although both major scandals in their own eras, Rob Ford's occurred at a time when the internet was widespread. You know the climax already. Odds are you've seen the infamous video. Odds are you've seen this one too, and you know word for word what he says right after this.
I've never said that in my life tour. I would never do that.
But I bet you know very little about the man behind those clips. There's a common myth about Toronto that's been debunked many times over. Around the turn of the millennium, the United Nations called Toronto the most multicultural city in the world. This claim has been repeated for over 20 years, and the city would even put it on promotional material. Except, the UN never said anything like this. It's also not true. Miami technically beats out Toronto for having the most foreign-born residents. But because it's close enough to the truth, because it feels true, it's persisted, even to this day. Like Toronto itself, Rob Ford is plagued with myths that don't hold up to scrutiny. That he saved the city $1 billion. That he donated his salary to charity. That if things had gone differently, he would have been re-elected. That despite his personal issues, when he wasn't struggling with addiction, he was actually a pretty good mayor. Because his story ended somewhat tragically, and because for most people their only impression of him are clips, where he's admittedly being very funny, his reputation has been softened, and his worst moments overlooked. Any documentary about Rob Ford that focuses only on the spectacle of his scandals and doesn't try in the slightest to evaluate his policies is frankly not worth watching and not worth making. Rob Ford the man was complicated. His legacy is not. Of those who are called, few are chosen. This is the line that is etched into the gravestone of Rob Ford's father. It's a line that his family often repeated as a mantra. When Rob later ran for mayor, he explained it to a reporter by adding one more line. Quote, "The Ford family was chosen." If you've read anything about the Fords, you've no doubt seen them called the Canadian Kennedys. It's a frame of reference that basically just means multi-generational political dynasty. Although these days, personally, I think the Cuomo family are a better comparison. Unlike the Kennedys, the Fords are new money, and they are far less liberal. What they do have in common is a highly regional power base. If the Kennedys are royalty in Massachusetts, then the Fords are royalty in a place called Etobicoke. Thankfully, we don't need to go so far back on the Ford family tree to begin our story. It starts right here with the original patriarch. Douglas Bruce Ford was born smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression as the youngest of 9. His father died when he was young, and with his family deep in poverty, he dropped out of high school at 16 and began working. After a few years in sales, he and a neighbor founded a company, Deco Labels. It's almost too on the nose that a political family would come from a signage business, but that's the truth. A few years go by, and Doug buys his partner out. By the 70s, Deco Labels was reliably profitable, and by now he and his wife Diane, also involved in the business, have had 4 children. The eldest two, Kathy and Randy, have spent most of their lives out of the public eye. Kathy has struggled with addiction since at least the 90s, and was forced to endure some horrific acts of violence caused by a string of unstable partners, although thankfully she survived. Randy, who is nicknamed Blackjack because he almost never takes off his trademark cowboy hat, had been arrested 17 times by age 33, for reasons varying from theft all the way up to assault. If not for the younger 2 siblings, the Ford family would not be a household name. There was Doug Jr., and 5 years after him, there was little Robbie. Although there was an age gap, Rob and Doug were extremely close. If Doug was the ambition, Rob was the heart. They overlapped a bit in school growing up, and if we believe Doug, Rob was the best student out of the Ford siblings. Rob would help out Doug on his paper route, and Doug would buy him hockey cards in return. It was not a given that Rob was destined for politics. His earliest passion appeared to be football. His dad sent him to a Notre Dame training camp one summer, and he eventually got accepted for football at Carleton U, which, I gotta say, great choice of school. His love of football will, in a bizarre series of events, nearly cost him his job as mayor. But the football career never quite took off since he didn't get much playtime on the field and he was homesick. So after a semester or 2, he returned home to work at the family business. By the 90s, all 3 of the Ford sons were at Deco, although it was clear that Doug Jr. was the one being groomed to take over eventually. Deco would eventually have offices across North America, and by the 2010s, it would be making $100 million in sales annually. Let's be clear, the Fords are rich. They had a massive house with a 3-car garage, they owned a yacht, and had a condo in Florida. And the future finance minister came to barbecues in their backyard. But Doug Sr., likely because he grew up in poverty, never thought of himself as a member of the elite upper class with their college degrees. Quote, he lived below his means, something he tried to instill in his kids. According to Doug Jr., quote, we'd work 16 hours a day and Pops would say, why are you home early? And then, if we were working, we were paying him $25 a week for rent. To show discipline, he never gave us anything for nothing. A colleague described him as, quote, a guy who was very simple and very unsophisticated, very much from a different time and place, but pure of heart and decent and wholesome. Sure, he belonged to a country club, but it wasn't a downtown country club, a key distinction for a family from Etobicoke. Etobicoke makes up the western suburban slab of Toronto. It's an area where the wealth disparity is stark. Although Rob's house was a fairly modest bungalow, it was situated on a street littered with McMansions. But just a few minutes away on Dixon Road, you had massive apartments housing mainly immigrant families from Somalia, rundown towers that have gone ignored for decades. Unlike his older siblings, Rob spent much of his childhood hanging around with friends in the less well-off neighborhoods. Once when he was 6 or 7, he asked his parents if they could move to the community housing project in Scarletwood Court. You'll see this come full circle in his political career. Rob was never afraid to speak to anyone one-on-one, no matter what part of the city they lived in. For now, Rob is content to work at Deco and figure out what he wanted to do with his life. Meanwhile, it was actually his brother Doug that first pushed the family towards politics. He got a taste for it when he helped run the campaign of a local councillor who was running for mayor, Doug Holliday. Holliday wanted labels for his signs so that he could cover up councillor with mayor, and Deco was a natural fit. And this gave Doug Jr. an idea. He saw the way his dad would always rant and rave when Premier Bob Rae was on TV, calling him a socialist or a communist. So when the next provincial election came about in 1995, he prodded his dad to run for a seat, even putting his name up for registration without him knowing. It took some convincing though because, quote, I can't stand those lying politicians. Not only would this be a nice stepping stone to his retirement, Doug Jr. could take over the reins at Deco earlier than planned. A few years later, he'll expand the company down south into Chicago. Doug Sr. easily won his election, alongside dozens of first-time politicians. Big changes were coming to Canada's largest province. He couldn't have seen this far ahead, but Doug Sr. would help transform the city that would one day elect his son mayor. The Toronto you know today was only born in 1998, and it had to be pulled kicking and screaming into existence. Here's a fun game to play whenever you meet a Canadian traveling abroad. Ask them where they're from. If they say Toronto, ask them where they're really from, because then they might sheepishly admit they're actually from, say, Mississauga, Vaughan, Oakville, God forbid Pickering. Our next major player is a man who recognized this simple truth. Quote, nobody knows Ontario but everyone knows Toronto. And so, he set out on a mission to change Toronto, Ontario, into Toronto, period. This is Canada. It's made up of 3 territories and 10 provinces. One of them, Ontario, is by far the most populated. This region right here, the boot of an extremely large leg, includes the national capital, Ottawa, and the provincial capital of Toronto. There is a 1 in 3 chance that any Canadian you meet is from here. Also born in this region was this guy right here, Mike Harris. He was Ontario's 22nd premier. When his government was elected in a landslide 1995 victory, it marked one of the most transformative and controversial periods in Canadian politics. The Progressive Conservative Party, aka the Big Blue Machine, had run Ontario for 4 uninterrupted decades, before hitting a low point in the late 80s and early 90s. Historically, it had been a much more centrist party, but when Mike Harris became its leader, he shifted it far to the right, eventually crafting a winning platform he dubbed the Common Sense Revolution. More than any other politician in Canada, he was the ideological successor of Reagan and Thatcher. He wanted to massively cut taxes, sell off public assets, take on labor unions, reduce social assistance, and generally reduce the size of government. And at the time, many in Ontario wanted those things too. Doug Ford Sr. was one of them, a true blue follower. Quote, if Harris said, we're going to take everybody's firstborn and we're going to sacrifice them on the altar of a balanced budget, Doug would say, that's exactly the right thing to do. Doug Sr. was a freshman member of the class of '95, a loyal backbencher and a reliable vote. Quote, he was never asked to speak on a matter, never asked to carry an issue, and the less the world saw of him, the better the premier's office liked it. This was because he had a tendency to rant and go off script. The most notable thing about his time at Queen's Park was that he became longtime friends with his seatmate, Jim Flaherty, who would eventually become the country's finance minister. It's outside our scope to evaluate Harris's full legacy, although I'm sure you can guess my take on it. But there was one area of the Common Sense Revolution that was broadly unpopular across the political spectrum, namely because Harris never campaigned on it, and dropped it as a surprise 2 years into his first term. Mike Harris had pretty much always been at odds with Ontario's largest city. Like any big city, Toronto tended to vote much further to the left than the rest of the province. By 1996, Toronto City Council was openly criticizing Harris's initiatives, and sometimes even organizing protests at the legislature, which is located in the heart of Toronto itself. Some of these policies directly impacted the city, like when they sold off Highway 407 to the private sector, or the abrupt canceling of the Eglinton subway extension that had already broken ground. If you piss off enough voters in the city, chances are it'll come back to bite you in the next election, thanks to the sheer number of seats located there. Entire elections are won and lost in the suburbs of the GTA, and it's much easier to win those seats if you have a city council sympathetic to your goals. And so, in January 1997, the Harris Gov initiated what some now call Mega Week. The Harris government was notable for just how efficient they were at ramming through legislation. What used to take months under other parties now just took weeks. Mega Week was even faster. 5 new bills were tabled, one for each day of the work week. Each would go off like a bomb. That's not an exaggeration. One of the consultants who helped draft it said, quote, if we are going to do it, we've got to do it fast and bomb the shit out of them before they know what's happened to them. The minister in charge of the file had specifically requested the job since he wasn't planning to run for re-election. And that's how we got the infamous Bill 103. Effective January 1st, 1998, the cities of Toronto, York, East York, North York, Scarborough, and Etobicoke would be amalgamated into one city. The result, which would keep the name Toronto, would be home to 2.3 million residents. Overnight, it would become the single most populated city in the country. These 6 cities used to make up an area called Metro Toronto. Downtown Toronto, or Old Toronto as it's sometimes called, was this small slice. It's the home of the skyline you're probably thinking of, with the CN Tower, the Rogers Centre, and the islands jutting off into Lake Ontario. But surrounding it were 5 other cities with their own mayors, their own councils, and bylaws. They were also very different places visually. Old Toronto mostly predated the World Wars, but the outer cities were distinctly of the 1950s suburban boom. Fewer skyscrapers, far more cars, and cul-de-sacs. Before this forced amalgamation, the 6 cities split the cost of many shared services. Key things like transit, police, sewage, and water. The metro model, when it was first introduced in the 50s, was praised across the world for its unique two-tiered approach to local government and urban planning. It had the benefits of scale while still retaining some level of local autonomy. But over the decades, the 6 cities had descended into feuds and bickering, and many were calling for the metro model to be overhauled. But no one, except for the Harris government, felt that a forced amalgamation was the solution. The backlash was immediate and went across the political spectrum. Protest groups took to the streets. Members of Harris's own party left in protest. In the next election, only 8 of Harris's 22 Toronto MPPs held onto their seats. This was not an issue of party allegiances. This was a matter of the province interfering in local autonomy. Not once during the campaign had this been promised. Harris's own campaign manager was caught off guard, and his chief of staff later called it, quote, bad public policy. Despite his ideological similarities to Margaret Thatcher, this was actually the reverse of what she did to London a decade earlier. She abolished the Greater London Council and gave the 33 boroughs more autonomy. How can you be against big government and then go on to create a city government that is larger than half the provinces? The mayors of the 6 cities rebelled. Mel Lastman, mayor of North York, fumed as he declared, quote, they're carving us up like turkey and it isn't even Thanksgiving. Presenting a united front, the 6 of them argued, quote, we do not believe that a city of 2.3 million people is a local government. Under the new boundaries, each city councillor would represent around 50,000 people, a staggering increase. Each city held its own referendum, and in all of them, the residents overwhelmingly voted against the amalgamation. Minister Al Leach tried to dismiss them as just a vocal group of activists, but turnout for the referendums was 36% higher than your average local election. The thing is, local referendums are not legally binding, because in Canada, cities have basically zero legal standing. The Canadian Federal Constitution makes no mention of cities, instead saying that the provinces have full authority to define them as they see fit. To use the popular phrase, cities are creatures of the province. Although 5 of the cities filed lawsuits, a judge ruled against them. Legally, the Harris government had every right to ram through the merger, and that's what they did. On January 1st, 1998, the new megacity of Toronto was born. Emboldened by the courts backing them up, they forced through mergers of the next 3 biggest cities. Smaller towns began to follow suit, quote-unquote voluntarily. In just a few short years, Ontario had gone from 815 to 447 municipalities, almost a 50% cut. The most dramatic reshaping of local government in the country's history, and as a direct consequence, the number of local politicians was also cut in half. Every new election saw incumbents running against incumbents, with only the strongest keeping their seats. Toronto, of course, was no different. Among the 6 cities, there had been 100 councillors and 6 mayors. Now there were going to be just 56 councillors and 1 new mega mayor. The first ever mega election was held in November of 1997, and it would be a chaotic campaign unlike anything Canada had ever seen. Mike Harris also intended to shrink the provincial legislature, which meant neighboring ridings were merged, and Doug Sr. would have to fight in a nomination battle to keep his seat, a battle he ultimately lost. Here's a quote from him discussing his bizarrely worded campaign strategy. And so began the one and only interruption in the Ford family dynasty. For a little over a year, there was no Ford holding elected office. But with the newly introduced Mega City Council, Robert Douglas Ford had finally found his calling. He was going to be a city councillor. Why? Who knows? Every politician will tell you that their only goal is to help people. But surely Rob had personal motivations as well. Was it to follow in his dad's footsteps? It was common knowledge that he idolized his father. Maybe there was also a part of him that realized he'd be stuck in his brother's shadow if he kept working at Deco. Whatever his reasons, this was the start of a long road. The first ever mega Toronto election was unconventional. To ease the transition, the city's 28 wards would elect 2 councillors each. Young Robbie, with no real-world experience besides working for his dad's company, ran in Ward 3. The Fords were well known in the community by this point. They donated to local charities, they sponsored local sports teams, and hosted gargantuan yearly barbecues. It was also impossible to miss their massive signs, which in some cases took up the width of people's entire garage doors. Despite the effort, Rob came in 4th. He was a first-time candidate running against 2 incumbents and 1 former mayor. The next cycle wouldn't be any easier, since the province was shrinking the size of council even further, down to 44. But the good news for Rob was he had just lost the only election he will ever lose. Meanwhile, the race for Toronto's first ever mega mayor had been unlike any election Canada had ever seen before. Canada uses a parliamentary system, which means our prime minister runs in a specific local riding. Assuming the party wins the most seats, the prime minister only has to win their individual riding, which on average might see anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 votes at most. There is no elected position that includes every voter across Canada. But for cities, the mayor is elected citywide, and under the new mega boundaries, that potential pool of voters was now 1.6 million. Not only that, Ontario does not have a party system at the municipal level. The mayor of Toronto must win more votes than any other politician in the country, and they must do so without the help of a party fundraising apparatus. So, to win, you needed the raw power of name recognition. Only one man in Toronto had enough clout to separate himself from the pack and be declared the immediate frontrunner. For the past 25 years, Mel Lastman had been the mayor of the former city of North York, and he was the founder of a popular furniture store chain, Bad Boy. Their commercials made him a local icon with his famous catchphrase,
"Who's better for furniture and appliances? Oh, buddy!"
His track record in North York spoke for itself. Although many had scoffed at his idea, he had worked for years to transform North York into a second downtown. If you look at photos of Toronto's skyline, you can see his impact, a second core of skyscrapers jutting out of a sea of single-family homes. Lastman was a staple in the business community, and friends with all the big movers and shakers in conservative circles. Lastman had been against amalgamation up until the very end, but he was now going to make the best of a bad situation. His promise? Mel makes it work. He promised not to raise property taxes for 3 years. Reflecting after the fact, Lastman said, "I thought I'd ran campaigns before, but I've never been in a campaign before." He very nearly blew what should have been a coronation. Despite at one point polling an astounding 37 points ahead of his nearest rival, Lastman's tendency for gaffes and speaking without thinking caused the race to narrow significantly. There was a reason he was nicknamed the Tanned Time Bomb. He infamously said, quote,
"I haven't seen anybody in North York that's homeless."
This was the exact same day that an unhoused woman was found dead in a North York gas station. His comments suggesting that 10-year-olds be penalized for serious crimes also raised some eyebrows. Barbara Hall, the former mayor of Old Toronto, put up a surprisingly good fight, but the final vote still went Lastman's way, 51 to 46%. Even from its first ever election, the battle lines of downtown versus the suburbs had been drawn. A version of this map will be seen every election moving forward. But now that we have a mega mayor, what do they even do? It's a broad job description. They show up to cut ribbons, shake hands, preside over council. A mayor is a mascot, a spokesperson, someone who is immediately recognizable in a political cartoon. What Toronto needed was someone to sell it to the world stage, to rehab its reputation as the city Canadians love to hate. Even as early as the 1940s, there was a radio play called Everyone Hates Toronto. And as one famous actor once quipped, it's like if New York was run by the Swiss. If you're not from Toronto, it sucks. If you're from Toronto, it still sucks, but it sucks less than everywhere else. It has literally the world's most congested highway. They cracked the world's top 10 worst rental markets. It's loud, it's too big, but they also have all the cool stuff. Except for hockey, they're the only ones with the sports teams, so we all have to begrudgingly cheer for them. If you're trying to break into finance or media, it's basically a requirement to move there. I guess they also have the world's tallest building, fancy museums, and I hear the zoo is pretty good. Lastman, the smarmy salesman he always was, understood these contrasts and marketed the hell out of Toronto as a worldwide tourist destination.
Hi, I'm Mayor Mel, and you're on the air. Phone, fax, or email. I want to hear what you have to say.
When the Spice Girls broke up just before their '98 show in Toronto, Mel personally wrote to them begging them to get back together. His tenure was full of eye-rolling moments like this, treating Toronto as the center of the universe. Like the blizzard of '99 when he called in the army to help shovel snow. Lastman, especially in his first term, is generally regarded as an effective mayor when it came to major votes. His process has been described as horse trading. He'd go to individual councillors on a vote-by-vote basis and make them promises to ensure their support. In a council without a party system, it's just how the sausage gets made. Temporary alliances to get big-picture stuff passed. He was even known to make compromises with the lefties on council, giving them committee roles in areas they cared about, which is partly why there were so many bike lanes built during his tenure. Much of Lastman's energy during his first term was ensuring the city's finances survived amalgamation. The Harris government's most common justification for amalgamation was that it would ultimately save taxpayers money. Bigger is better. Economies of scale. But some people objected. Quote, "I disagree with restructuring because it believes bigger is better. Services always cost more in larger communities." That was a young man named Mike Harris from just a few years earlier. It turns out economies of scale only save you money if you weren't already running 6 economies of scale. Not to mention, many of the most expensive services provided by the new city were already shared under the old metro model, namely transit, police, water, sewage, ambulances. Okay, but what about the services that used to be split? A common example is the fire service. Why pay for 6 fire chiefs when you can pay for just 1? Well, post-amalgamation, the new merged fire service cost 13% more to operate. Looking at the total budget, in 1997, the combined budget of the 6 cities was $4.5 billion. And yet the first 3 years of the amalgamated budget, it was 5.6, 5.5, and 5.9 billion. Efficiencies were supposed to eliminate redundant employees, but in fact, within the first 10 years, the workforce will actually grow by 5,000. Toronto had almost 50,000 city employees, which is more than some towns had in their entire populations. Lastman, although a conservative himself, was not afraid to let Mike Harris know just how displeased he was with the whole ordeal.
Mr. Premier, you lied to me and you lied to the people of the city of Toronto.
And as recently as 2001, he called amalgamation a disaster. He even openly threatened to have Toronto secede and form its own province, something it legally can't do, but makes for a great headline. Although it might seem juvenile at times, Lastman was actually playing a pretty skillful game of chicken with Mike Harris. Amalgamation was already deeply unpopular, so Harris was incentivized to make the first few years go as smoothly as possible. If the water stops flowing, if the garbage isn't picked up, his government will be blamed. And so, Lastman successfully negotiated a lump sum payment of $50 million and a loan of $200 million interest-free. He even got Harris to sign on to his pet project, the Shepherd subway line, which has jokingly been called the subway to nowhere because of its tiny length and abysmal ridership numbers. Lastman had pulled all of this off without raising property taxes for 3 straight years. Maybe Mel really did make it work. Public polling seemed to suggest so. In 1999, 70% of respondents said they were satisfied with life after amalgamation. Another poll said 66% felt it was a success. But really, those temporary cash infusions were just masking a deeper problem. A ticking time bomb had been lit by amalgamation, but it wouldn't go off until the end of the next decade. As the new millennium rolled around, Lastman sleepwalked into a second term with a staggering 80% of the vote. This time, he was joined on council by a passionate 30-year-old man from Etobicoke North. Rob Ford had finally won himself a seat. We ask a lot from our councillors, especially in big cities where they work full-time. They effectively split their time between 2 very distinct jobs, the one inside council and the one outside. From the moment he was elected, there have been 2 Rob Fords. He was almost a completely different person in each role, and you either considered him a loudmouth and a bully, or a true hero standing up to the waste and inaction of the City Hall bureaucracy. Inside council is the boring part of the job. You sit in on meetings and committees that last for several hours, you vote on bylaws, you debate them, raise a point of order, table an amendment. Almost all of what happens in these meetings is open to the public, and much of it is recorded, but very few people have the patience or the knowledge of the procedures to pay much attention. For the most part, Rob Ford didn't have the patience either, and very quickly made a name for himself. He's a distinct looking and sounding man. When he was younger, he used to be slimmer back when he played football regularly, but by his 30s, he adopted his recognizable silhouette. His critics always commented on it.
From the cyclists Let's say to me, and as soon as I get the emails, the first thing they say is, you're a fat slob, they go after my big belly, and I say, okay, I can understand that, fine, but what's the solution?
He was also known to become sweaty, red in the face, out of breath when he was worked up about something. If Chris Farley had still been alive, he would have almost certainly played him on Saturday Night Live. Even as a newbie to council, he had always been great at staying on message. Within months of being elected, he coined a phrase that he would repeat for the next decade and a half. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. He still needed to be shown the ropes, and luckily he had a willing seat neighbor, a veteran councillor named Jack Layton. Rob got along great with Jack, and years later he would say he always knew how to vote on any given issue because he'd just do the opposite of what Jack did. Canadian viewers will likely be surprised by the unexpected friendship between these two men. Jack and Rob are as far on the opposite sides of the political spectrum as you can get. Jack and his wife Olivia Chow, also on city council, would go on to become two of the most well-known NDP politicians in the country, with Jack leading the party to its best ever election result in 2011. Their friendship makes zero sense on paper, but what Rob has made clear over the years is that the one thing he respected more than anything else was someone standing by their principles. He hated flip-floppers. Speaking on Jack, he said, quote, "He really cared about people, and he was 10 times better than all those spendaholics that got down there now. He had manners." So while he had his one unexpected best friend, he quickly made enemies with everyone else. If Rob had an arch nemesis, then it was councillor for Ward 7, Giorgio Mammoliti, which technically made them neighbors on the map. Some people run for city council because they're fed up with the potholes on their street. Some people run as a jumping off point to run for higher office later. Others, like Mammoliti, run because they want to build North America's tallest flagpole. It was a plan that would have cost $3.5 million, and surprise, surprise, never got done. Mammoliti's career is almost as crazy as Rob's. At one time an elected member of the union-friendly NDP, during his time on council, he'd swung hard the other way. He once declared war on Toronto's stray cats and bragged about personally capturing 300 of them. But his longest crusade was his insistence that City Hall was overrun by socialists. That there were, quote, councillors in hallways talking about Fidel Castro and what a hero he was. Given his fiscal leanings, you'd think he and Rob would get along just fine, but Mammoliti had committed a cardinal sin. He held the dubious record of the councillor who expensed the most out of his office budget each year, $43,150 to be exact. Rob had always remained consistent on his desire not to abuse his budget, bragging that he once spent just $10 in his first 6 months. When one of his staff paid to copy some papers, Rob got upset at them. He preferred to pay out of his own pocket, spending around $1,000 a year of his own money. This was another way he took after his dad. Doug Sr. donated his salary to charity each of the 4 years he was in office. He didn't think the public should have to pay for politicians. During a council session in 2002 where they got into it over expenses, Rob hit Mammoliti with the term Gino Boy, an outdated anti-Italian slur somewhat specific to Canada. The two of them would be at each other's throat for the next 8 years. When enough councillors complained, Rob had to start cataloging how much of his personal money he was spending. Rob tried unsuccessfully for years to eliminate free perks for councillors like Metro cards or passes to the Toronto Zoo, which he argued weren't fair to the taxpayers footing the bill. During a session in 2002, Rob had put forward a motion to get rid of the free zoo passes, but he had returned late from lunch and missed the vote. When he realizes what happened, he stands up and begins ranting at a colleague.
And my understanding from staff is that those grants are in which?
There's no way I am going to sit here and take this nonsense. I'm telling you right now.
Oh,
okay?
Council.
And you're not going to continue this meeting until I get to move that budget. Because this snake should be back in his cage where it comes from. You slithering snake.
Chairman,
He's the one who did it. I know he's a weasel, and weasels and snakes belong in the zoo. Okay, and I'm not letting this go.
No, Councillor.
You guys can grab a recess
It's
until I get to move my
unparliamentary.
Rob was known to be so loud that one councillor asked to trade places so they could be farther away. Rob had some outside-the-box thinking when it came to policy. Rather than install a suicide prevention wall for the Bloor Street Viaduct, he felt the city should instead crack down on pedophiles since they cause people to commit suicide. During a different session, council was discussing putting homeless shelters across the city.
I'm sorry to say, this is an insult to my constituents to even think about having a homeless shelter in their ward. And you want me to have a public meeting to discuss this? Why don't we have a public lynching?
Whenever Rob introduced a bill to cut expenses at City Hall, he often found himself as the lone vote against 44 others. He never put in the legwork to actually get other councillors to vote with him. It's not that there weren't other fiscal conservatives that were sympathetic, it's just that he was so unlikable, so abrasive, that he alienated everyone. But those failed votes did help him in the long run. You might ask if Rob was actually in favor of paying for, well, anything. The answer was yes.
My goal is to have police officers in every school, eventually. I want more police officers and less politicians.
In another classic outburst, he was incensed that another councillor would suggest that they audit police overtime claims. City council meetings are long and dry. The most entertaining moments are by far when a councillor gets a little heated, which is why the press loved to write articles about his antics.
Pam McConnell and John Fillion, see? Sure, walk away. It's the easiest way to do it. Pam McConnell and John Fillion, from what I said, okay?
Answer the question.
All right, you just call him a fat fuck. Yeah, why do you say that? Why do you say that? Well, yes, you did. You just call him a fat fuck. You did. You said that. You did that.
Why did you? I just heard you.
That's right. You heard it, okay? What did you say?
And so even though he was a loner that nobody voted with, he was slowly building name recognition. Rob was also building a reputation on the streets, and the Rob Ford out there was unrecognizable from the man inside City Hall. Mike Harris once said, quote, "When you meet one Ford, you meet and know them all." Once, when Harris was addressing his caucus, Doug Sr. interrupted him. He shouted that a resident in Etobicoke had been trying to call the Premier's office, but never got a response. Harris said he was too busy, only for Doug to say, quote, "I don't care, just make sure you return this guy's call." After an awkward silence, Harris laughed it off. Rob learned from his father that you have to treat voters like paying customers. They pay taxes, and they expect good service. Rob, probably more than any other politician, maybe anywhere, would drop what he was doing if he got a phone call from a resident, drive out to their house, no matter where it was in the city, and help them. With what? Anything. Need help shoveling snow? He's got you. Leak in your roof? He's got you. Dead rat in your yard? He'd get animal control over there. City drainage flooding your lawn? He knows who to call. Cockroaches in your apartment? He'll get a bylaw officer to pressure the landlord. Need help lifting a fridge out of your house? He'll show up with someone and they carry it out for you. A strip mall might be stealing power from a church? Rob is on the case. Can't afford to move into a more expensive apartment? Rob will try and negotiate with the landlord and get you a discount. He obviously couldn't solve every problem, and he maintained that he never used the word promise. What he did guarantee is that he'd at least try. One time, when a resident complained about a rundown property, with just a few phone calls, he was able to get 2 fire marshals, a public health official, and a bylaw officer to show up, and he wasn't even there himself. One time, he mediated a dispute between 2 neighbors over a pile of dirt. It was so heated, they had their lawyers present. And yet when Rob showed up and spoke, they listened to him like he was a judge. Rob's ward, like much of Toronto, is very diverse. It was full of recent immigrants from Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and there was even an especially large Somali community over on Dixon Road. Many residents don't speak English very well and have trouble navigating a complex bureaucracy like Toronto's. You call someone up at the city and you spend hours on hold, only to get redirected to another department. But then there's this guy, Rob Ford, who hands out business cards with his personal cell phone number. And if you call, more often than not, he'll pick up. And if he doesn't, chances are he will call back later that evening, as late as midnight. And when you tell him what your issue is, he'll drive all the way out to where you live, regardless of whether you're in his ward or not. His habit of doing this angered other councillors, who tried to block him from answering calls from their constituents. This, predictably, backfired, and he kept at it. His former chief of staff believes Rob had thousands of dollars of cash on him at any given time, and would simply hand it out to residents when they needed something. It's a style of local politicking that endeared him to some, but its limitations are obvious. There's a story from back in the day when Rob was approached by members of the Somali community in Etobicoke, hoping to get some funding for an after-school program to help keep kids out of gangs. Rob, who is not a fan of using taxpayer money for community services, instead offered to go over to an ATM and personally give them $500 of his own money. They did not take him up on the offer. Just like his dad, Rob detested the idea of government-funded welfare. Sometimes you need solutions at scale, but Rob's ideology consisted of cut, cut, and cut. Rob's white whale that he failed to make happen for his entire political career was to cut city council in half, from 44 down to 22. His reasoning, again, was that it would save taxpayers money, not having to pay $100K in salaries. With 44 members, each councillor represents around 50,000 people. If he got his way, each councillor would then represent over 100,000 people. By far the most in Canada, and more than some federal MPs represent. Even if you had 22 Rob Fords on council, you simply cannot personally respond to the needs of a city with over 2 million people. And he certainly wasn't suggesting that councillors hire more employees to compensate, as he also bragged that he had fewer staff than all of his colleagues. Rob's vision for what a councillor should be completely contradicted the policies he pushed in council. How do you explain this contradiction? You don't need to, because Rob Ford was a day-by-day guy. He never looked at the big picture. Endlessly generous with his own time and money. A man who genuinely wants to help people, but only if he has a direct hand in it. Nothing angered him more than the idea that the city should pay for those same services at scale. These two clashing images of Rob Ford would divide the city in his eventual election. As hard as it seems to reconcile them, these were the same man. Mel Lastman's second term started out even stronger than his first. His re-election in 2000 saw him win close to 500,000 votes, breaking his own record of most votes won by a Canadian politician, a record that would stand unbroken for almost 2 decades. But from that point on, it was all downhill. Gaffe after gaffe wore down his credibility, and a scandal ultimately pushed him out of politics altogether. Right out the gate, just days after his win, things got deeply personal. Lastman was sued by a woman for $6 million because he fathered 2 sons with her in an affair. Lastman came out and acknowledged the affair, which he claims ended 40 years ago. Although most people agreed it did not impact his work, a mayor making the news for personal reasons reflected poorly on the city. There were some more mundane scandals, like Lastman shaking hands with a member of the Hells Angels gang in a photo, thanking them for bringing business to the city and calling them, quote, a nice bunch of guys. When told that they were considered a criminal organization, Lastman claimed he was unaware of that fact. Thankfully, all future Toronto mayors learned their lesson from this and would avoid being photographed with suspected criminals. Next up was his disastrous trip to Africa when he was trying to drum up support for Toronto's 2008 Olympics bid. Although the IOC claims this did not have an impact on their decision, Lastman had joked, quote, what the hell do I want to go to a place like Mombasa? I just see myself in a pot of boiling water and all these natives dancing around me. And then there was the time in 2003 when the SARS virus hit Toronto. The World Health Organization advised people not to travel to the city, and he lashed out at them on CNN, saying he'd never heard of them, they were killing the local economy, and that he was going to fly to Geneva and give them a talking to. Lastman was in his 70s now and clearly slowing down. His health was in rough shape due to a hepatitis exposure he'd received a decade ago. What ultimately killed his hopes of re-election, though, was the computer leasing scandal. In 1999, the new megacity solicited bids for computer rentals. Council voted on a plan that would cost $43 million. However, the actual lease ended up costing the city almost twice as much, with lease terms being extended, adding to the cost. The city also purchased far more software licenses than they actually needed. In the end, much of the blame was directed at the former city budget chief, Tom Jakubek, and it was alleged he took bribes in exchange for the bloated contracts. The investigation was a major headache for Lastman, and although he was not accused of any impropriety, his budget chief was, and it had happened under his watch. Terms like corruption were getting thrown around in council, and Lastman got defensive, targeting his anger at one of the younger councillors who was leading the investigation, and if rumors were to be believed, also gunning for his job next term.
I am asking for a legal opinion, and I will sue you for everything you can possibly lay your hands on.
Yeah, he threatens everyone to sue everyone. If you're going to do it, do it. Don't talk about it, Mr. Mayor.
Practically jinxing himself, he shouted out, quote,
You will never be mayor of this city. This I can tell you right now, because you say stupid and dumb things.
But as the months wore on, it was clear Lastman was a spent force. And so he announced he would not be running again. With Mega Mel gone, Toronto would surely never have a mayor embarrass them on the national stage ever again. With no incumbent, the field was cleared. The mayor's race was once again a free-for-all. Enter David Miller. David Miller is almost the cliché ideal of a downtown elite. Born in the UK, raised in San Francisco, attended Harvard, he worked as an employment and immigration lawyer and had ties to the left-wing NDP. He was big into bike lanes and environmental issues, a disciple of urbanists like Jane Jacobs and Richard Florida. He even drove a Prius. Electing him as mayor would be a generational reset from Mel Lastman, who had been 30 years his senior. It seems unlikely that Toronto would swing so far in the opposite direction, but Sometimes that's what happens when a mayor sticks around for too long. Miller had been one of the 2 councillors who uncovered the computer leasing scandal, which gained him some of the necessary name recognition to run in the 2003 mayoral race. His campaign initially took on an anti-corruption platform, and he even brandished a broom as a prop at campaign events. As is often the case with local elections, sometimes hyper-specific issues become focal points. In this case, it was the controversial proposal to build a bridge connecting the city's island airport to the mainland. Miller was against it for environmental and financial reasons. Miller even got a high-profile endorsement from environmentalist and totally normal man, Robert Kennedy Jr. If Miller was the left-wing ideal of Toronto elite, then his main opponent was the right-wing counterpart. A man with a name so on the nose, it's the Canadian equivalent of naming your kid Bob Republican. Tory's great-grandfather founded Sun Life Insurance. Tory himself had been an aide to Ontario Premier Bill Davis, he'd been on the board of Rogers Cable, and commissioner of the Canadian Football League. I say all this to emphasize that John Tory and his family are basically the dictionary definition of old money and as close to Toronto royalty as you can get. And yet, he still felt like he needed the backing of the Ford family to run for mayor. This is a story that's been told by several sources with slight variations over the years. But supposedly, sometime in 2003, John Tory met the Ford family at a diner in Etobicoke. Curiously, it was Diane that did most of the talking. Although she was never a public figure like her husband and sons, it was clear that she played an integral behind-the-scenes role running their campaigns and flexing her high society connections. The Fords, just like they had done for their pal Doug Holliday, were willing to do their part to get out the vote in Etobicoke. But Diane had a condition. Quote, "Robbie's turn will be after you." Even 7 years before he took the plunge, Rob was serious about his mayoral ambitions. Although the Fords did help deliver much of Etobicoke for Tory, it wasn't enough to stop Miller's win. The split you expect to see on the map is largely still there. Downtown versus the suburbs. Miller's success was breaking into some of the suburban outskirts, with a 5% margin of victory. Miller's first term was mostly slow going. He followed through on the cancellation of the Island Airport Bridge, pushed for a variety of recycling and clean energy projects, and in response to the computer leasing scandal, he created a lobbyist registry and appointed an integrity officer at City Hall, whose job it would be to crack down on any conflict of interest issues among councillors. In theory, if a councillor, or even the mayor, voted on something without declaring a conflict of interest, it could lead to them being booted from office. An extreme, worst-case scenario that will surely never happen. But it's good to know it's there. The era of gaffes, shady dealings, and ugly antics at City Hall was hopefully now over. Oh, hold on a second. Sorry folks, I am getting word that Rob Ford was re-elected to his seat in Ward 2 with an astonishing 80% of the vote. Etobicoke stood by their man even under this new progressive era. Although Rob was a known entity to those who paid attention to City Hall, it's during the Miller era where Rob will start to become a household name across the city. Mel Lastman was for the most part fiscally aligned with Rob, but under Miller, he could assume the role of an opposition councillor. And maybe he felt emboldened to say increasingly outrageous things, even when the stakes were as low as possible. Take for instance this session where an argument over a pothole got wildly out of hand when he called Gloria Lindsay Luby, quote, "a waste of skin." For context, they had a bit of prior history since she had beaten him the first time he ran for council. She had also long suspected him of kidnapping a dog-shaped lawn ornament from her when ransom notes started showing up at her house. This is the kind of comment that might end a career at a higher level of government, but again, local politics is the Wild West. Rob had earned himself a spot on the John Oakley Show, a weekly radio slot that broadened his audience as he complained about excessive spending at City Hall. Examples of this excessive spending included HIV testing.
It's very preventable. If you're not doing needles and you're not gay, you won't get AIDS probably. That's the bottom line.
This is both extremely incorrect and extremely callous. This wasn't the only time he took aim at drug users. Quote, "Let me give you a suggestion on how you deal with hardcore drug addicts. This is not drinking wine or smoking a joint. This is heroin or cocaine. With heroin or cocaine, you end up one of two ways: dead or in jail. That's it. There are only two ways." But he had even less sympathy for cyclists of all people.
Roads are built for buses, cars, and trucks, not for people on bikes. And, I feel my heart bleeds for them when I hear someone gets killed, but it's their own fault at the end of the day.
Rob rants were varied in their targets. He once complained about how they weren't allowed to use certain pesticides anymore, and that they must be fine because their parents used them all the time and they turned out fine. And who can forget the time when council was debating whether to allow shopping on holidays, when Rob made a bizarre detour.
Those Oriental people work like dogs. They work their hearts out. They are workers non-stop. They sleep beside the machines.
By this point, Rob was also making headlines outside the council chambers. At a Maple Leafs game in April, he was drunk to the point of verbally berating a couple. He asked a man if he wanted, quote, his little wife to go to Iran and get raped and shot. Security had to remove him. When he's asked by the press about the incident, he denies ever being at the game. Except he had been handing out his business card to other spectators. After the hockey game incident, the papers could now conclusively declare Ford can forget his mayoral dreams. In 2008, police were called to Rob's house when his wife Renata accused him of domestic violence. However, these charges were later dropped due to, quote, inconsistencies in Renata's version of events. The past few years had been a low point for the Ford family. In 2006, after a short bout with cancer, Doug Ford Sr. passed away. Understandably, this would have had a profound impact on all his children. According to a family friend, Rob's dad did not attend either of Rob's first two victory parties. Doug Jr. has said that their dad never praised his children directly. He'd say he was proud of them to friends and family, but not face to face. As the public found out years later, Rob would sometimes visit his father's grave in a state of intense grief. He would call members of his staff and ramble at them, breaking out into sobs. In one of those calls, he implied that he eventually ran for mayor because of his father. Both Miller and Ford would win their races again in 2006. The incumbent advantage is so strong in Canadian cities that short of a massive scandal, you can basically waltz right in for a second term. Miller won an impressive 57% of the vote and nearly made a clean sweep of every ward. He'd come up with a new plan to connect the city's underserved suburbs, Transit City, a network of light rail trains that was going to be funded primarily by the province. His opponent had attacked him for increasing the city budget, nicknaming him the $1 billion man. But if that bothered the residents of Toronto, it didn't bother them enough to affect their votes. A lot can change in one term though, and if there was one councillor who remained consistent on spending, it was Rob Ford. Indeed, the city budget in Toronto had been increasing year after year, as did the number of employees. But the flip side is that Toronto was still one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Miller was elected at a remarkable time in Canada. His win coincided with a new Prime Minister and a new Premier of Ontario, both of them Liberals. And although Miller was more linked to the NDP, he would get along well with both of them. From the feds, he had managed to secure a fraction of the federal gas tax for Toronto. But with the province, he negotiated something far more substantial: the 2006 City of Toronto Act, a one-of-a-kind law that was sort of like a city charter, although not one with constitutional protections. To this day, Toronto is the only Ontario city with these special privileges.
And I think we're successful because the people get it. You know, they understand that Toronto, which is a city of 2.6 million in an urban region of 5.5 million in a country that's only 30 million, that you have to be treated differently and your strengths recognized.
To use a parent and child metaphor, Toronto is like the eldest child who is allowed to stay home alone for a few hours. The major changes were in two areas: the mayor and finances. The mayor can now make appointments to committees, and the mayor can appoint specific councillors to their executive, a pseudo-cabinet of sorts, but without party affiliations. To be clear, these were powers that council agreed to delegate to the mayor. If they voted to, they could strip those powers away. Why they might need to do this is anyone's guess, but I suppose there could be a scenario where a mayor becomes unfit for office, God forbid. The fact council was willing to delegate these powers spoke to how well Miller managed his council, and although he himself was a progressive, he knew he needed votes from moderates and even some conservatives to get his agenda passed. The more significant part of the new charter was the introduction of new revenue tools. The property tax still did the bulk of the heavy lifting, but now the city could legally enact billboard taxes, alcohol and tobacco taxes, road tolls, congestion fees. But the only ones council approved were land transfer fees for when a property trades owners and a vehicle registration tax. Both of these were fairly minor, estimated to bring in just $354 million. But every new source of income relieves pressure from the always contentious property tax. Not a single person on earth enjoys paying new taxes. even if some people recognize the need for them to fund city services. And broadly, public polling showed that a majority of residents were against the new ones. But the VRT especially became a focal point of the urban-suburban divide. Councillors pounced on it as evidence of a war on cars.
This again is another example of the war on the car. It's time to stop the war on cars.
A catch-all cause that could be used to argue against everything from new bike lanes to the LRTs in Miller's Transit City Plan. In fact, the VRT is responsible for David Miller's only major vote loss across his 7-year tenure, a remarkable feat. And even then, it was simply a deferral of a vote on the VRT until after the next provincial election. After he lost it, Miller played hardball, threatening significant service cuts if the taxes didn't get passed. The Shepherd subway might even have to shut down. His gamble paid off. When the VRT came up to a vote again, it passed. That previous lost vote had been extremely close, 23 to 22, and one of his executive, Brian Ashton, had voted against it. Miller would not tolerate dissent in his ranks and asked for his resignation from the executive team in response. In a system without explicit parties, and where mayors don't have a cabinet, Miller ran as tight a ship as one could reasonably expect. There's also a flip side to this. Midway through Miller's second term, a rogue faction emerged on council called the Responsible Government Group. It was mostly center-right fiscal conservatives who acted as the unofficial opposition to David Miller's executive. Residents did not like the new taxes, and these councillors were jumping on that momentum. They were proposing around $86 million in budget cuts per year. You would think that a fiscal hawk like Rob Ford would fit right in with a group like this, but he was either not invited or declined to join. Even among the right wing of council, he was seen as too much of a loudmouth and not a team player. He had no love for them either. Quote, "They call themselves conservatives until they get down there, and then they just spend. They won't even talk to me in the hall. The so-called right wing, like Karen Stintz and Case Oates. I file 100 motions every budget. We could save $100 million, but I haven't been able to save anything because they won't vote with me. Not one red cent." And so, he remained a lone wolf. It should not be surprising that during his 3 terms on council, he didn't pass any major motions. On the occasional issue, family friend Doug Holliday would throw him a vote, but otherwise Rob was more than content to have it go on the record that he was the only one out of 45 votes that was willing to cut his own salary. For a decade, it made him a laughingstock, but within a year, it would finally pay off. The election of Rob Ford, like any politician, never comes down to just one issue. It's a complex mix of factors. But I would argue that if you had to choose just one single event that shaped the 2010 mayoral race more than any other, it was this: the infamous 2009 garbage strike. There is no Democrat or Republican way to take out the garbage. This is a quote often attributed to New York's eternally beloved mayor, Fiero LaGuardia. Although it makes for a great campaign slogan to prove you're above party politics, it's overly simplistic. Take Mel Lastman. When he was mayor of North York, he loved to brag that he got their garbage picked up twice a week, something the other 5 cities did not enjoy. However, when he became the mayor of Mega Toronto, he was never able to extend that luxury service citywide. And that's because he spent much of his 2 terms battling against the city's new colossal unionized workforce. The largest part of a city's budget goes to wages, paying employees. And when the 6 cities merged, it created the 2 largest public unions in the country, CUPE Locals 416 and 79, aka the indoor workers and the outdoor workers, which had around 5,500 and 18,000 members respectively. They alone made up around 60% of the civic workforce. Outside, they make up everything from garbage, snow removal, Zamboni drivers, gardeners, animal control, and road maintenance. And inside, they run everything from daycares, rec centers, social assistance, and public health. The previous 6 cities all had different pay scales for city jobs, with the old city of Toronto being generally the highest and Etobicoke having the lowest. The union wanted the new contracts to match old Toronto's pay scale, whereas Lastman and the city naturally wanted them to match Etobicoke's, where some workers had not gotten raises since 1989. No agreement could be reached, and so Local 79 and its 18,000 members went on strike for 10 days, setting the record for the largest city workers' strike in Canadian history. It ended in a stalemate, and the most contentious issues would have to get resolved later down the line. Turns out later was 2002, and the strike record was broken again, this time with Local 416 joining Local 79. This strike lasted 16 days, and it only ended when the province forced back to work legislation, just in time for a visit from the Pope. The dispute was sent to the courts instead. Why is this significant? Well, think about it like this. If a city can get concessions out of the country's two largest public unions, that sets a precedent that other cities will try and repeat across the country. And this doesn't just stop with the public sector. In Canada, 70% of public sector workers belong to a union, while just 16% of the private sector does. What happens in Toronto has major ripple effects for organized labor across the country. Lastman, who had never been sympathetic to the unions, used phrases like, quote, holding the city hostage to describe the strikes. And regarding the union's job security provisions, he coined the mocking term, jobs for life. Although he often framed the unions as asking for too much, wages for local government workers in Canada have increased at a slower rate than the rest of the economy, going up only 2.5% per year compared to 2.9% on average. The contentious issues like wage harmonization and job security never did get resolved under Lastman. He kept kicking that particular can down the road, and was finally coming to a head under David Miller, when in summer of 2009, the record for the largest city strike was broken yet again. Now, David Miller had ties to the NDP, the party generally most sympathetic to unions in Canada. In some cases, like with the unions representing police, firefighters, hydro and parking workers, council had granted them the now standard 3% raises and no major concessions. But against the backdrop of the Great Recession, and because of the close budget battles over his new taxes just a year earlier, Miller opted to play hardball with Locals 416 and 79, since they made up most of the city's workforce. Miller and the city took aim at a few key items. The city wanted to contract out more work, institute a freeze on cost of living raises, eliminate seniority and job security clauses, and most controversially, they wanted to get rid of the ability to bank unused sick days and cash them out upon retirement. The indoor and outdoor unions balked at the fact they weren't extended the same offer the other unions were, in addition to the fact that councillors had just voted to give themselves a 2.4% wage increase. And so, they went on strike. Although it's commonly called the garbage strike, that's a bit of a misnomer. 24,000 workers went on strike, but only 1,100 of them were garbage workers. Because of several key strategic mistakes, the strike would quickly become a PR nightmare for the unions, sowing division within its own ranks and turning the public against them. For starters, the union management had been unusually silent about the 6 months of negotiations with the city, and they didn't warn their membership that a strike was likely. So on the day the strike was called, many workers were completely caught off guard and had no idea where to go and what to do. Morale suffered, disorganization and poor communication made it hard to build solidarity among the workers, much less with the general public. A strike pay fund wasn't set up until the strike was already underway. Union leadership was younger and lacked experienced organizers who had been through the last two major strikes, and the national union organization was hands-off in their involvement, even though the result of the strike would impact city unions across the country. And so, the strike stretched on for days. Days turned into weeks. Residents might have coped with closed down pools or unmowed grass in parks, but one missing service overshadowed all the rest and became impossible to ignore. People took to carrying their own garbage to designated dumping areas in parks. Hockey rinks became festering piles of rotting waste. One estimate pegged the amount at 70,000 tons. The smell couldn't be avoided. Vitriol against the striking workers grew as the summer heat exacerbated the stench of trash. In the time of the Great Recession, sympathy was at an all-time low. Quote, "They're lucky to have their jobs. Hundreds of people would kill for those jobs." On day 39, the strike ended. The union won no new benefits, although they prevented a wage freeze. But they also agreed to phase out the banking of sick days across a period of many years, something they never would have budged on a month earlier. Public sentiment toward the city unions had not been especially positive before, but this strike polarized residents against them in a way no previous strike had. This would have immense consequences for labor relations under the next mayor. Miller had put himself in a lose-lose scenario. Despite getting concessions out of the unions, he was seen by many as being too soft on them, as the strike went on for too long and the effects were far too visible for what he got in return. Union members, and those sympathetic to them, felt like Miller had betrayed his progressive base by picking the fight in the first place. Already divisive before the garbage strike, his fate was sealed. In September, a poll was published saying that 8 out of 10 Torontonians wanted him to step down. That month, he announced he was declining to run for a third term in order to spend more time with his kids. Suddenly, 2010 had become anyone's race. With no incumbent, there was going to be a record number of candidates throwing their hat into the ring. For Rob Ford, who had spent the strike driving around town to pick up trash for senior citizens, it was almost as if the stars had aligned for him. The race for Toronto's mayor is unlike any other in Canada for a few reasons, and the result is a sometimes chaotic free-for-all. Reason number 1. Federal and provincial elections are incredibly short and can be triggered at any time. From the day an election is called, a federal race is just 46 days on average, and provincial ones are 33. But because local elections always occur on a fixed 4-year schedule, candidates sometimes announce themselves up to a whole year in advance. The Toronto election cycle is a grueling endurance marathon where dozens of candidates fight for attention. Mind you, Toronto is also the media capital of the country. Candidates are under a level of scrutiny completely disproportionate to the level of power they're actually vying for. As you've already heard, the mayor of Toronto competes for the largest pool of votes in the country, more than even the prime minister, and so their fundraising limit is sky high to compensate. Candidates could spend up to $1.3 million, almost quaint by American standards, but enormous by Canadian ones. It's also far, far more than the $30,000 or so Rob would have spent when running as a councillor. Also new in the 2010 race were rules preventing donations from corporations and unions. But by far the most unique aspect of this election, and the one that would be essential for Rob and his win, is that there are no political parties. There are no primaries, no nomination contests. Anyone over the age of 18 with $200 can sign up, and this cycle saw a record of over 40 candidates. Many of these people don't even have a Wikipedia page, and their campaigns are nothing more than stunts. Some are performance artists, trying to bring more attention to gay rights. Others are just full-on white supremacists. Many of these candidates will drop out long before the registration deadline, such as our old pal Mamalidi. And most will receive basically zero serious media coverage. Only 3 candidates will even break the 1% line. And despite the lack of an official party system, the top 3 contenders did correspond pretty cleanly to the big 3 political parties: the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives. With Miller out of the race, the progressives in the city needed to unite around a candidate. The most promising was Miller's de facto apprentice, the young councillor Adam Giambrone. Giambrone, at a relatively young 33, was another policy wonk like Miller, and had been the chair of the Toronto Transit Commission, one of the most high-profile appointments you can have on council. He launched his campaign in February, and it seemed like he might put up a decent fight to continue Miller's legacy. Or so he hoped. He had launched his campaign with a photo shoot at his home, featuring his long-term partner. The existence of this partner was news to his girlfriend, who understandably went to the papers. It was a complete own goal on Giambrone's part, and he dropped out of the race after having been in it for just 9 days. Scrambling to find a replacement candidate, progressives rallied behind Deputy Mayor Joe Pantalone, and although he put up a solid effort, the most notable thing about him is that he once did an amazing photo shoot highlighting that he's a certified short king at just 5'1". Considering Giambrone was a lanky 6'4", I have to draw the conclusion that the progressive wing would only be satisfied electing either the tallest or the shortest candidate possible. But even without the unforced error of a cheating scandal, it was doubtful Toronto had much of an appetite for a candidate so closely linked to David Miller. If a left-wing candidate was going to win, it was going to be someone closer to the center, likely with ties to the Liberal Party. Although not the only Liberal to throw his hat into the ring, George Smitherman was by far the most high-profile. Smitherman was Ontario's deputy premier, and had held a few different cabinet positions. But this name recognition was a dual-edged sword. The provincial Liberals were not necessarily beloved, and Smitherman had been associated with a few snafus here and there. He had been nicknamed Furious George for his less-than-sunny demeanor. He was positioning himself as an outsider to City Hall, a centrist and the adult in the room who could come in and clean up the mess left behind by the progressive wing. The real question was who Smitherman's main opponent would be. Who would be the designated right-wing candidate? Well, obviously, it wasn't Rob Ford. Obviously. To say Rob was a long shot is the understatement of the century. In this January article speculating on potential candidates, 5 names are discussed, none of which are his. Rob, quite smartly, understood that his message resonated beyond party lines and was casting as wide a net as possible. The average voter does not follow politics closely at all. This goes doubly so for the local level, where there is basically zero news coverage. Turnout rates are abysmal, and most voters cannot name their local councillor, much less their school board trustee. If Rob had the word conservative under his name, some people might rule him out entirely.
There are no political parties. There's no Liberal, NDP, Conservative. It's all out the window, okay? We have everyone from every political stripe here on our team. I welcome anyone and everyone.
But without cues like this, name recognition is everything. And if you knew Rob's name, you knew it for one of two things. He was either the guy yelling in council or the guy who showed up at your door when you called him. All of those years of picking up the phone, Rob had been amassing an important resource: phone numbers. He had written down the number of everyone who had ever called him and thrown them in a cardboard box. He estimated, probably with some exaggeration, that it had 80,000 numbers in it. Whatever the amount, his campaign team started dialing those numbers and jotting down names. People who would donate money. People to go door to door. People who wanted to sign for their lawn. Real grassroots support. Rob was shunned by the mainstream conservatives when he first launched his campaign. The only one of note who was there for the launch was Finance Minister Jim Flaherty, a longtime family friend. It seemed like the right-wing establishment was waiting for a real candidate to emerge before backing anyone. But Rob never viewed himself as a long shot. Speaking to the Toronto Sun, he had his sights aimed a lot higher. Quote, "My ultimate goal is not mayor, it's prime minister. I've got to learn French first." In the early days, Rob's brother Doug was named campaign manager. He was also running to fill Rob's seat on council, although he wouldn't have to try very hard. You could run a literal Ford truck in Etobicoke and it would get elected. But in a citywide race, they quickly recognized that they needed professional help if they were going to stand a real chance. The Fords will make a critical hire early on in the campaign that, I would argue, won them the election. In March, they met with the founders of a small consulting firm called Campaign Strategies. As one founder will later say, "We're in the business of getting conservatives elected and ending liberal careers." The older of the two men, Richard Ciano, left the campaign early after some personality clashes with Doug. But the younger of the two, a man named Nick Kouvalis, stuck around and transformed a disorganized mess into a juggernaut. Nick Kouvalis was a mid-30s guy from Windsor who had been involved in conservative politics for almost a decade. He's known to be more than a little abrasive. The last campaign he worked on led to him getting charged with uttering a death threat against the candidate he was working for. He was later acquitted. Years from now, he'll resign from another candidate's campaign for calling someone on Twitter a cuck. But right now, meeting the Fords, he's about to pull one of the biggest upsets of his career. The Fords have said they liked Kouvalis because he reminded them of themselves. Hardworking, ambitious, a bit of a temper. Kouvalis forgoing a hotel and instead sleeping in the Deco offices earned him plenty of goodwill with the brothers. He's also credited with introducing the concept of robocalls to municipal elections in Canada, and a robust data collection plan. Doug and Kouvalis were frequently at odds with each other. Doug had actually refused to give up the title of campaign manager, and so Kouvalis settled for chief of staff to the candidate for mayor. He supposedly quit the campaign multiple times after some heated screaming matches. He'd be driving home to Windsor, only for Doug to phone him, apologize, and he'd turn the car around. The Fords were known for being cheap. That was Rob's whole brand, but the things they decided were too much money were inconsistent. They had a campaign max of $1.3 million, and yet Doug went out and bought an RV without approval from anyone else. But on the other hand, when Rob was scheduled to give an important speech at City Hall, the brothers went ballistic over the $300 fee to rent a podium. Instead, brothers Doug and Randy built one from scraps. The brothers were still following their father's mantra that the customer is always right, and in this case, the customers were taxpayers.
You have to have business people running the city, people knowing how to create a job, knowing how to meet a payroll, and knowing everything about customer service. And customer service is number one in business, and it's missing down at City Hall.
As CFO of Deco Labels, notably non-union, Rob promised to be a hawk on labor relations. That was a popular position in the aftermath of the garbage strikes that had, quote, held the city hostage. He was saying he'd remove the ability for transit workers to strike entirely, and he'd be going after the job for life protections if he was mayor. Upon closer inspection, journalists found that Rob wasn't actually Deco Labels' CFO. Someone else at the company held that title. Rob's work amounted to little more than a couple hours a week signing documents. But either way, he was serious about cutting spending. He was extremely precise, down to the dollar. He wanted to cut this much in his first year and this much by the end of his 4-year term. How was he going to do that? Well, for one, he was going to cut city council in half.
And my platform is 44 to 22. And why I say that is this city has 22 MPs, 22 MPPs, and 22 school trustees. We do not need 44 councillors down at City Hall. So I want to have everything just one, and one. It only makes sense. It will save millions of dollars.
Not only was he going to eliminate Miller's 2 new taxes, he was going to keep property taxes below inflation and with no service cuts. None. Guaranteed. And although he'd be cutting the number of city employees, no one would be getting laid off. They'd simply wait until people retired and only hire half that number back. He was going to stop the war on cars by ripping out bike lanes and the St. Clair streetcar. And he was promising subways, subways, subways. Scarborough had been begging for a subway for decades, and they're going to get it.
I want to connect the Shepherd Line to Scarborough Town Center, a subway with 10 subway stations, and finish off the Bloor-Danforth loop. My plan does not include any new taxes, tolls, or congestion charges.
The private sector is going to pay for it. This all sounds amazing. Why has nobody thought of this before? Kouvalis felt Rob had a message that connected with people, but his delivery needed work, especially when he was reading off a script.
First, we will reduce the size of city council. Second, we will reduce the size of government, salaries and benefits.
In a one-on-one environment, like in his phone-in town halls, Rob connected with voters easily. But in the large crowd, it was a much different story. Believe it or not, he could be quite shy, always looking down at his feet. If it wasn't a topic he knew well, he'd stumble over his words. It was hard to keep him on one topic for long. This wouldn't fly on the campaign trail. Kouvalis trained Rob to only ever give 1 of 6 canned responses to a question. Even if the response didn't answer the question, who cares? It worked shockingly well. Rob, who used to struggle to stay on message, now had crystal clear talking points. Maybe the best of the 6 was the one he was promising not to do. He wasn't going to tear down the Gardner Expressway for $300 million. By implication, it meant that was something his opponents were going to do. And as a last resort, Kouvalis would ask Rob, "What would your father say?" Doug Sr. had plenty of folksy sayings that sounded charming coming out of Rob's mouth.
As my father taught me, if you look after the pennies, the dollars will look after themselves.
And finally, there was the pinnacle of Rob's sloganeering.
It's time to stop the gravy train. It will not be easy to end the gravy train, but I will do it.
Now, what does that mean? Well, that's the genius of it. It means different things to different people, but it always came back to a voter's anger at City Hall. It could mean new taxes, wasteful spending, bike lanes, greedy union contracts.
Respect for taxpayers.
The most popular video on Rob's YouTube channel is a video where he's at his desk going over every free perk city councilors get.
Free zoo pass, metro passes. This is equivalent to $1,300 a year. The parking passes, exhibition, we get in the X when it's on for free. We get the park for free. Conservation passes, come camping, any park in Ontario for free. Board of Trade, what's it cost to be a member of the Board of Trade? Hundreds of dollars. Everybody knows Casa Loma. Here's more passes for free. Free golf passes. This should be eliminated every single budget meeting. I try to get rid of this, and they laughed me out of the council chamber.
Rob's team found that they were connecting with people all across the city. A key voting bloc he had energized, to the surprise of many, were immigrant communities that made up much of the outer suburbs, many of whom don't speak English as a first language. Religious communities made up of Christians, Muslims, and Sikhs who skewed socially conservative. These are residents who historically don't show up to vote in local elections. They vote federally or provincially, but very rarely locally. But Rob talked about tangible, day-to-day issues. Quote, "When we did the demographics, it showed he brought out a group of people that I termed bread and butter Canadians. They go to work every day, they work hard, they don't want to worry about politics. They worry about putting food on the table, and they want to spend time with their family, and they don't want to have to worry about things like garbage pickup." Rob was able to speak to those people. He had a very, very strong appeal. Another point in his favor, he doesn't feel like a politician. He was just an average guy. His favorite restaurant foods were, quote, Chinese food, veal parmesan, and a good steak. His Tim Hortons order was a French vanilla coffee. He read the Toronto Sun, not the Star. He could never live downtown because he needs his space. His yard, his driveway. He's got 2 young kids after all. He's always wearing a jersey for either the Leafs or the Argonauts. He's, quote, not online all that much. His favorite shows? Seinfeld, Cheers, and Three's Company. He wasn't an Ivy League lawyer like downtown David Miller, and he wasn't some backroom conservative power broker like Mel Lastman and his business buddies. They had just been two sides of the same elite coin. He loved to call the left-wing counselors poverty pimps, posers who wouldn't dare visit the neighborhoods they claimed to care about so much. They were all just talk when it came to the homeless crisis in the city, all while they voted to give huge grants to theaters and art installations. Why was Sandra Bussing charging an Easter Bunny costume to the taxpayer? Why did Adam Vaughn need a $200 espresso machine? Why did Kyle Ray spend $12,000 on his own retirement party?
Some expenses are legit, I agree. But I'm sorry, when there's a discrepancy of $53,000, there's something wrong.
The city's operating budget went up by hundreds of millions each year, far too much for anyone to actually conceptualize. But most people could picture $55,000, which is how much someone got paid to water plants at City Hall. They could picture that number so concretely because the average Toronto resident made less than that in a year. By the summer, it still seems like a free-for-all. Smitherman has largely consolidated the left-of-center vote and has the backing of the business community. Rob continues to be shunned by the right-wing establishment. It's like they're begging for a serious conservative to enter the race. But who would that be? Well, rumors are swirling that none other than John Tory is considering jumping back in. Tory is a clear fiscal conservative, but far more moderate than Rob on social issues. A far broader appeal, not to mention he came close to winning once before. He was a dream candidate for the establishment and likely the only person who could stall Rob's momentum. But Kouvalis saw this coming and made a preemptive strike. He drew up, in his own words, a hacky cartoon, showing Tory getting bulldozed by the gravy train, a signal that Rob would go as hard on him as the lefties. The warning shots seemed to work, and Tory never entered the race. Rob was now the official candidate for the right wing. Really, this is just the establishment waking up to the cold hard facts that have been apparent since June, when a shocking poll was published showing him ahead of Smitherman by 3 points. Okay, well, could be a fluke, margin of error and all that. But then, in July, another poll came out. Rob is ahead by 9. There's no denying it now. This is Rob's race to lose. It's August, and there's an important meeting. By this point, Rob finally receives the invite that proved he was in the big leagues. He, Doug, and Kouvalis were invited to meet with a real power broker, Mike Harris. The significance of this moment can't be overstated. This was their father's political idol inviting them into the fold. The only account we have of this meeting is from Nick Kouvalis, so take it with a grain of salt. Harris offers to raise money for the campaign, but Kouvalis interrupts him. If he wanted to raise money for them, fine, do it after the election, but they didn't need conservative elites coming to their rescue. Quote, all of them who said Rob Ford is a knuckle-dragging animal who couldn't tie his own shoes and should never be the mayor of Toronto, they were all lining up to literally put their frickin' lips right on his ass. It was disgusting to watch all of it, and I'm happy if you quote me on that, because it was disgusting. Harris was reportedly furious, but it didn't matter. The establishment fell in line anyway. September rolls around and the deadline to drop out passes. By then, there are only 3 candidates who will get more than even 1%. Pantalone, a distant third, Smitherman, and Rob. Smitherman was floundering, and behind the scenes he had called David Miller, urging him to get Pantalone to drop out. Miller never returned the call. Smitherman realized he had to take Rob head on. Another unique aspect of Toronto's mayoral race is the frankly insane number of debates. If you're a party leader running to be PM, there are 2 official debates, one in French, one in English. But during his campaign, Rob attended almost 100 debates. Some were put on by the big media networks and broadcast to thousands. Others were held in community centers, churches, high schools, and only those who attended them got to hear the answers. Some of these debates feel like the Wild West, with Rob loudly sharing his personal phone number to the crowd or saying he's in favor of reducing the voting age to 16. You simply go to as many debates as you can so you don't look like you're afraid. Smitherman assumed that in a serious head-to-head policy debate, he'd be able to wipe the floor with a college dropout like Rob. His campaign even hired a man in a chicken suit as a way to goad Rob into a one-on-one debate. This was a severe underestimation of Rob's abilities. Early on, Rob's team had told him to avoid going after Smitherman directly, letting other candidates attack him first. But with the race narrowing, Rob was given the green light to draw blood, targeting Smitherman's Achilles heel. eHealth was an electronic health records platform developed by the Ontario government, which had undergone extensive delays and had been racked with questionable contracts and rampant expenses, totaling over $1 billion. Smitherman had briefly been Minister of Health during this period, and although the issues predated and continued after he left, it was a huge stain on his record. It was the exact sort of financial waste that Rob had been railing against at the municipal level. Anytime Smitherman hit him with an attack, no matter the subject, Rob could always deflect back to eHealth, and it always won over the crowd.
Who do you trust with your hard-earned tax dollars?
So even though Smitherman was technically an outsider to city politics, he still got lumped in with the rest of the gravy train. Take this moment, where Smitherman tries to lay a trap by asking him why a law and order candidate like Rob doesn't support the long gun registry.
I favor and have for my whole life gun control and gun registry. Where do you stand on this issue?
And, you know, the gun registry was $1 billion boondoggle, as you know.
An instant pivot back to his key promise to stop wasteful spending. There was exactly one weak point where Smitherman could credibly go after Rob. Smitherman was openly gay, and in fact the first openly gay member of the Provincial Assembly. For context, gay marriage had been legal for 5 years at this point, Winnipeg had an openly gay mayor for a decade, and Toronto had the second highest gay population in North America. If not for some of Rob's past comments, this fact would not have been a major part of the campaign. In particular, Rob's infamous rant about how AIDS was only a disease that gay men and drug users had to worry about. More worrisome were some posters and radio ads put out by some of Rob's voters that leaned into explicit homophobia. Quote, "At least Ford's wife is a woman." To be clear, these slogans were not sanctioned by Rob's campaign, and he distanced himself in a tweet. It's within this context that Rob connected with a man named Dieter Donné Henderson. He was an HIV-positive gay man who wanted to talk to Rob about his views. The two of them, plus Doug, sat down and had a conversation in an attempt to smooth things over with the gay community. If Rob had just given an apology, it may have gone over better. But Doug just had to add this. "I've had gay friends come and visit me in Chicago. Gay men have slept in my bed." When Kouvalis found out about this, he went ballistic, buying Doug a box of condoms as a signal to keep his mouth shut. The meeting itself was one thing, but this had just planted the seeds for a scandal so bad it risked sinking Rob's campaign right when he was on track to win. See, unbeknownst to his campaign staff, Rob kept in contact with Donné Henderson. They chatted on the phone on and off. And one day, Rob admitted to Kouvalis that the press was apparently looking into their phone conversations. After some shenanigans that involved catfishing Donné Henderson on Twitter, Kouvalis realized that he had been recording their phone calls, and that one of them was particularly damning. The call was almost an hour long and rambling, but at one point, the two men very clearly exchanged the following. Quote, "Can you find OxyContin so I can get on the medication? I'll try, buddy, I'll try. I don't know this shit, but I'll fucking try to find it." Rob, why would you promise that? When confronted, Rob denied saying it up until he was shown the recording. This was it. It was over. All these months of work down the drain because Rob couldn't help himself. It didn't matter whether he meant it or not, the press would tear him to shreds. Unless he got ahead of the story. Against the Ford's wishes, Kouvalis decided to leak the story to a friendly outlet, the Toronto Sun. The spin was that Rob clearly never intended to actually go by Oxy, that he was uncomfortable just trying to calm down a troubled man. And it worked. The campaign rolled on as if it had never happened. Later, a story broke that Rob had pled guilty to a DUI in Florida all the way back in 1999. His mugshot was hitting the front pages. Although he initially denied the arrest, it didn't matter. The next week, Rob went up in the polls. Maybe voters found it relatable. Maybe they viewed it as the media trying to tear down a man for mistakes he made a decade ago. Maybe it just didn't change their view of him. He'd always been loud. He was already known for a past drunken incident. Either way, he was proving himself to be invincible to scandal in a way other candidates simply were not. Smitherman again and again failed to convey a coherent message to voters. He had pages and pages of policy, but nothing that stuck with people like stop the gravy train. What was Smitherman promising? Well, he wanted to keep taxes low, fight with the unions, and rein in the city budget. It was simply a more palatable version of what Rob was promising, but less believable. because Rob was the guy who had spent a decade on the losing end of votes to cut spending. As the big day draws closer, some polls are showing the race narrowing to within a few points. Others still indicate a blowout. But Smitherman's campaign seemed to know it was over weeks ago. His campaign manager will later recall a focus group they ran where a woman stood up and said, quote, "If I had to choose between a guy who beats his wife and a guy who wasted $1 billion, I would pick the guy who beats his wife." He stresses that neither of these things were true, but the fact that she felt they were showed they never had a chance. On the big day, the Ford family is at home watching the results on TV. Doug's seat is called almost the instant polls close. There was no question there. They sit there watching the news as votes begin to get counted, and they might be sitting there for hours waiting to find out who... They called it. They called it. Rob won in 8 minutes. 47-36. It's not even close. What the hell? And look at that map. If you flatten it out, if you remove the shades of gray, you can paint a stark picture. The divide in the megacity had been there since the 6 cities had been forced together. But it had never been as clear as it is now. As one anonymous City Hall staffer put it, he's like Robin Hood for the suburbs. The day after Rob's win, the National Post published a quote from a polling expert, reacting to the news using a very particular phrase. I can't verify if they invented the term, but it is the earliest record I found of it in print. It gave a name to the ragtag, unconventional coalition of voters who had come together and named Rob Ford their mayor, a term that would be fully embraced by the two brothers, eventually becoming the name of their biography. Welcome to Ford Nation. Hey, if you want more from me while you're waiting for the rest of this series, did you know I released a full multi-hour documentary earlier this year? It's called 17 Pages, and you can watch it exclusively on Nebula. It's about one of the largest controversies in modern American science. It covers a decade-long investigation and a tangled web of lab mice, Nobel laureates, and congressmen. 17 Pages is a project I wrote, directed, and animated with Nebula in mind. With their support, I was able to film interviews on location, commissioned some amazing art, and most importantly, they developed a custom software feature to help me tell the story. 17 Pages could not exist anywhere else but on Nebula. And to add a cherry on top of that, Nebula is also the place where you'll be able to see all 4 parts of this Rob Ford series first, because I post them there 2 weeks early. Making documentaries has been my full-time job for over 2.5 years now, and a big reason that's been possible is because of fans supporting me on Nebula. If you're still on the fence, don't worry. Nebula now has free 3-day trials where you can explore all of what Nebula has to offer. And when you do sign up using my link, you can get a 40% discount on an annual subscription or a whole $200 off a lifetime subscription. Either way, a significant chunk of that money goes directly to me for as long as you're subscribed, which will help me make bigger and better brockumentaries. Support me and other independent creators by signing up to Nebula today. As always, thanks for watching.